Should we or shouldn't we take the COVID-19 vaccine? Is it going to become a mandate in the near future? Are you selfish for not wanting to take it? What about all of the detractors to the vaccine? And how about that one video of that nurse who got the vaccine and shortly thereafter passed out? Let's talk about that today. I'm once again joined by Bethany and Robin. How are you two
Great.
ladies?
Really good. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you all back. Absolutely. It's a wonderful time every time. And in fact, you are a fan favorite. I get the most feedback about y'all, and people have been wondering where you've been. So I'm glad to have you back. So let's start off today talking to Dr. Bethany Reif. Dr. Reif, how exactly are vaccines made? And what's the general process? What are we doing here? And what are some of the eccentricities about how this particular vaccine, we're talking more about the Pfizer because that's one of the highest profile names. But if you have any other information to lend, absolutely. Go ahead and tell my audience how vaccines are made and how this particular one was approved and etc.
Okay, so um, the basic this is a new technology, this mRNA thing that Pfizer and Moderna have done. I'm most familiar with the Pfizer vaccine just because that's the one that's actually currently released and currently being given in the medical field. So the mRNA it's a piece of messenger RNA is what that's called, is what that M stands for. And what that does is it sits in your cytoplasm. It enters the cytoplasm of your cell. It does not enter the nucleus. It cannot change, it cannot affect or change your DNA. And in the cytoplasm of your cell, the mRNA is able to get to enter the cytoplasm. Your your cells actually then take that information and create a protein. And that protein in the vaccine is the spike protein that's on the coronavirus. And then the cell will then present the spike protein on the surface of the cell. Your body recognizes, hey, this is foreign material. It creates antibodies to the spike protein. And then your body has those ready, and then your body remembers that antibody. And so when your body then sees the coronavirus, if you're exposed, it will go, hey, we know what this is. This is foreign. And it instantly is able to make a whole ton of antibodies super fast. And thus hopefully you don't get sick is the idea. And so that's how the vaccine works. They figured out that to get that mRNA into the cytoplasm of your cell, they're wrapping it in some lipids because that protects it until it's able to get in the cytoplasm, and that's how it gets into the cell. So that's how it works. And this is a brand new technology. So as far as how they created it, I do know I don't work in a lab. I don't know how like laboratories, technically do these things and all the things involved in that. But my understanding is this is a lot easier than creating a lot of the other vaccines that we've done because they're normally trying to create a protein or wrap it with a protein, or they're trying to take the virus or the bacteria and change it in some way to deactivate it so that it doesn't make us sick and then put that in the vaccine. And that takes a whole lot more steps and is a whole lot more technical than making a little tiny piece of mRNA and sticking it in some lipids, and that's all that's in the vaccine. And so that's a whole lot easier. And so they're hoping that makes this vaccine that makes this vaccine a lot easier to create and faster to make. Now, as far as vaccine approval and the FDA and how that works, it's really complicated, but well, it's complicated and simple at the same time. There are multiple organizations that kind of monitor this. There's an outside board that looks at all the data that then presents it to the FDA. There's also they look at all the data, and there's also a board that's regulating whether or not everything that the study does is ethical and safe, and they're not hurting any of the study participants in this whole thing. The study participants, so there's a regulatory board that makes sure they get this big, disclaimer and consent form that tells them every possible thing that could happen to them, or any concern. And the study participants are, of course, agreeing to do this of their own free will and understand the risks that they may be taking. So Pfizer's study, they kind of coupled it a little bit with Moderna for the total of 70,000 participants or somewhere around there. But what they do first is of course, they decide that it works in the lab, and then they start with a few hundred, or even I think they start phase one is less than that. It's, maybe 20, 30 participants. They inject it in those few participants, make sure that they mount an immune response and that they look immune. And then if that passes and that works, then they go to a few hundred participants, make sure everything looks okay, make sure they're mounting an immune response, the vaccine seems to be working, and no awful side effects. And then once it passes, that's phase two. Once it passes phase two, they're allowed to go into phase three trials, which is several thousand. And so for Pfizer, that was somewhere in the range of 40,000. And I think the other 30,000 comes from the Moderna study. And so in total, I think we have around 70,000 people that are involved in the vaccine study, is what I've read. And then out of that, they did a, randomized controlled trial, which means they have controlled participant is a blind control. So you don't know if you got the vaccine or not. The person giving you the vaccine doesn't know if they're giving you the vaccine or not, but it's a double blind placebo, so that nobody knows whether you're getting the real one or the placebo. And then they monitor who gets sick and who doesn't. So Pfizer vaccine passed the phase three studies. They watched them for 2 months, and their safety profile was seemed fine, and they are mounting antibodies, and they had fewer people get sick on the vaccine side versus the not vaccine side. And so then it goes, in this case, it's not considered completely FDA approved. There is no FDA approved vaccine. This is considered emergency use approved. And so basically the criteria for that is that it has to pass these phase three trials. And then it also has to appear to, the benefit has to outweigh the risk, basically. So yes, there's still we don't know a lot about this vaccine. We don't know how long it's going to last. We have safety data on it for 2 or 3 months, but we don't have safety data on it anywhere past that. The study is planned to run for 2 years, so this study is ongoing. So that's kind of how the FDA approval type stuff kind of worked. I feel like I was supposed to talk about something else.
Well, so what's your opinion specifically? What do you think about the timetable? Obviously, we're on crunch time with trying to create this vaccine. What are your thoughts?
So normally this takes a long time to create, because they're creating a protein or doing something very technical that takes a lot of steps in the lab. Each one of those steps has to have FDA approval. So the paperwork and the time involved in that is immense, as well as the money. And normally, if a company is trying to design a new medication or a new drug or whatever, they're going to throw some money at it, see how it goes, and then they're going to go to the next step. And some board in the company has to approve that they're getting the money, that the project should move forward, and there's all this paperwork and time and money involved. So the fast track, as far as I understand, that the way this was fast tracked is, for one, the government subsidized this, and all the companies, of course, it's a race, and so all the companies threw all their money at it all at once, and there is none of this waiting to get approval for the next step and that kind of thing. So that helps things speed along. The other thing that sped along is the FDA was not approving things in front of it. The FDA was on this, the committees that needed to do the approval were looking at this first, and it was first in line at all times. And so those are the steps that were skipped. The paperwork line and waiting for approval for money line is what is fast tracked. And then of course, it's emergency use approved rather than full FDA approval. So that's the fast track. It was not fast tracked in that they skipped any steps as far as the studying and that kind of thing. So from my understanding, I think my opinion of the whole vaccine overall is this looks good on paper. As far as what we're seeing far, it looks good. As far as the Pfizer vaccine goes, that's the only one I was able to look at in detail. And then I think the way they're rolling it out, as far as offering it to the most high risk, right now they're offering it only to medical personnel that are high, that are, and they're offering it. Nobody's requiring it of anybody. And the medical personnel, at least most of the ones I talk to, we recognize that we're somewhat being guinea pigs. We don't know a lot. We don't know how much time, and that's, so they're agreeing to that. They're okay with it. It's just like being a study participant. They agree that this is what we know. Maybe some of them are really looking at it and really spending a lot of time investigating and deciding what they, if they want this or not. And I'm sure there are a lot of them that are like, oh, it's emergency use approved, I'm getting it, that kind of thing, and not looking at it at all. But I think most of the medical community recognizes that this is still an early approval. We don't know a lot, and that there's always things that we don't know.
So the primary thing for most people is honestly, the way I see it is most folks who are getting the vaccine really just want to get back to work. That's most people I talk to subjectively. Like subjectively, they just want to be able to be immune to go back to work. But let me turn to Robin and ask her what the process that Bethany just laid out did not skip any of the steps. At least that's what we understand. What's your opinion of and right now, apples to apples, we can talk about these other ones as well, but just make sure when we're talking about Pfizer, we know that we're talking about Pfizer versus some of these other vaccines that are out there, because there are quite a few participants in this. What are your thoughts, Robin?
I agree with Dr. Reif. I think that um, this is the most thoroughly tested and transparent vaccine
Mhm.
manufacturing process that the country has ever seen. And I don't say that because it's great. It's not great. There's nothing great about it. But the fact is that people line their children up to get 54 doses, not even including the flu shot, um, before the age of 11 in this country, thinking that these vaccines are tested for so long and that it's all transparent and all of that, when in fact, this is the most tested vaccine. People are scared of this vaccine. And I'm like, well, what if I told you that this is the best tested vaccine this country has ever seen? So, what are you putting into your kids? Because there was no transparency around that. And there was not billions of people around the globe watching those vaccines being developed. And the media wasn't reporting on any side effects. Parents who have kids who experience side effects are told that it's a coincidence. Sorry, I'm trying to get this lined up. That it's a coincidence, and that the kid was always going to be that way, or it's something that the parents imagined. And so, yeah, this whole entire process is under a microscope right now, and the whole entire world is watching. And so, yeah, I do agree. As far as man-made constructs of how to make a vaccine, this is the best that we've got, and that's not saying a lot.
All right. So, with all that in mind, without getting into the more conspiratorial aspect, we were talking about cost versus risk versus reward. What's the ratio here for COVID? Uh, and part of that does calculate in, can I go back to work for some people? For some people, that really is part of the calculation. Dr. Reif, what are your thoughts on the risk versus reward as far as taking the vaccine? Yes.
I mean, it probably depends on what your job is as far as how much your risk is. And so, of course, right now they're mainly offering it to medical personnel, and they're starting with the most at risk, the people working in the ICUs and the ERs and that type of thing. They're people out in regular clinics are actually lower on the list and that kind of thing. So, and right now you really got to work for a large medical facility in order to even be offered the vaccine. Um, so that's where it's starting. And I think each person really, no, they're not being told they can't come to work if they don't get the vaccine. I don't know. Since I'm not involved in any of those medical facilities, I don't know exactly how it's being treated as far as, if they have different rules about vaccinated people being able to work, like not miss work if they're exposed or something like that. Because I know there's strict rules on exposure, or if you test positive and that kind of thing, and how many days you have to stay home in quarantine, and that type of thing. So I don't even know how that's working in general. So I don't know if it's working differently if you've been vaccinated. So, and nobody, to my knowledge of my colleagues that I have spoken to, nobody's being required to get this in order to come to work. Maybe it's making them feel more comfortable at work, if they know they're frequently going to be exposed, and now they're not as worried about catching it, or hopefully they're less, somewhat less, less chance of them spreading it to their family members and loved ones and that kind of thing. One pro that I did that did come to my attention is that as this gets rolled out and gets rolled, as the more high risk populations get it, so the older population starts getting vaccinated, people that have been, being isolated for months, almost a year now, are now going to, people that are scared of the virus and have been staying home and not seeing any of their family because they're terrified, and they're missing Christmas with their family because they're scared of the virus. They hopefully the idea is they'll get this vaccine, their family members will get the vaccine, and they can again see their family. And so I'm hoping that is one real positive thing that will come out of this, because I think that missing each other and physical contact, just face-to-face contact with other people, is such a tragedy right now that people are missing out on that.
So, and I absolutely agree. That's one of the things I think that the real tragedy of coronavirus is not necessarily the virus as much as it is how much it's changed everything, how many people have died from suicide. It's absolutely frightening. That is a real epidemic. That's an interesting argument that if it makes you feel more comfortable, maybe it's worth the risk. But Robin, what are your thoughts on the risk of taking the vaccine, the risk reward? Some people can't go back to work until they've had the vaccine. That is rare, as Bethany Reif just said. But your thoughts?
I don't know of anybody who can't go back to work without the vaccine. I don't know what industry that would be or what position that would be. We're looking at an overall mortality rate survival rate is what, 99.97 overall, and it's just slightly lower for elderly people. I can't imagine a situation that it would be worth it for anybody to take this vaccine. I think that the real travesty of this is that our media has been allowed to run rampant. I think that they're criminals. I think that this has been psychological warfare against our people for the last 9 months. People are absolutely terrified. Nobody felt this way in 2009. Nobody felt this with the swine flu epidemic. Nobody felt this way in 2001 when MERS was here. Was it MERS? Sorry, is it SARS-1? I don't even remember.
SARS-1.
SARS-1, yeah.
I think MERS was in the 90s, wasn't it? A little bit before my time.
Yeah, I don't know. So, it all just depends on who's president, I guess. It depends on how much drama and how much fear the media wants to inject into society. And because, Obama was president during swine flu, then our media wasn't going to cover that story. Everybody just thought it was this like extra vaccine, and should you get it or not, no big deal. But and that also was not that different of a pandemic. It was a manufactured pandemic. It was something that the WHO had a huge role in with their entities that have captured them, such as GlaxoSmithKline. Same with this vaccine. So I don't think there's any reason to take this vaccine. I cannot imagine a circumstance. I've even spoken with a man who was he's like deep into PCR testing, and he has a company that handles that stuff. And sorry, I've got this cat walking around meowing at me. And he believes that at best the PCR tests are 10% false positive, but on average they're most likely a 50% false positive. And he doesn't really believe that this is this big epidemic. And yet he told me on the phone, and he's in his 70s, that he would get the vaccine because he doesn't want to die. from it. And I'm just like, wow, I don't think that this guy's at any risk from dying from this. But no, I can't
So
imagine.
that's a really good segue in. I guess we are going to the political aspect of this, and that's okay. I've already on this show. I've already made my opinions known, but I'm going to ask y'all in just a moment more on the political and the politicization of this. But Robin, what do you think about therapeutics? How much have you heard much about the therapeutics or followed that at all? Do you have an opinion on therapeutics versus the vaccine?
When hydroxychloroquine first came on the scene, and so uh, Fauci was saying that he wouldn't take it unless it was part of a study and blah, 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 which I think is a lie. I think all of them were on hydroxychloroquine in the beginning. I think all the world leaders were on it. I would want to see, honestly, a blood test from Fauci. I don't believe him any further than I could pick that man up and throw him. I believe they're all on it. And so when this Gates funded hydroxychloroquine study came about, hydroxychloroquine is used with zinc, right? I don't know the mechanism of how it works, but my understanding is that it helps transport the zinc to the cells where the zinc is actually able to be readily available or readily absorbed and do its job. And
It increases the pH of the cell. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bethany, that makes it easier for the zinc to cross the cell membrane. I believe that's what it is.
and
But keep
so
going.
they intentionally omitted it. And so you have this hydroxychloroquine study where it's all by itself. It's given to the sickest patients. They're all on their deathbed. They're all just honestly probably 72 hours from death at the point in time that they're even given hydroxychloroquine. They're not given any zinc. And then the placebo is vitamin C. I mean, that's just tobacco science from start to finish. That's how Monsanto does all of their science. That's how the tobacco companies did all their science. It's how pharmaceutical companies do all of their science. So that is the big study that disqualified hydroxychloroquine, is giving it alone without any zinc to nearly dead people while giving a vitamin C, which in itself is a therapeutic, and saying, nah, there's no difference in these two groups. There's no benefit. So yeah. And then whatever it is that Trump allegedly took, which I'll just go ahead and say, I don't believe for one hot second that Donald Trump ever had coronavirus. I do not believe it at all. But this fast-tracked drug that he allegedly took that made him feel so much better. And how do you pronounce it, Bethany? Do you know? Is it
I don't know what it was.
Remdesivir?
I can't remember the name.
Remdesivir.
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that.
Everyone says that it's just absolute garbage. It doesn't accomplish anything at all, and so it's just.
Well, the first studies said that there was nothing there, but then there were studies that said that there was something there. That it's always interesting. It's always interesting when that happens. But I think therapeutics are interesting. I think it's very interesting when you give someone an order of magnitude of the recommended dose, 2,400 milligrams of hydroxychloroquine in your study, and that's used to say that it creates heart issues. Well, if you take almost anything, I mean,
And
what do
Fauci
you
finally
think?
came out and said that he'd been taking vitamin D3 and vitamin C, and that he
Yeah,
might recommend. Like you think maybe you could have told the country that 9 months ago and see where we were at
absolutely.
today. Because I think 90% of people who get sick, severely ill with coronavirus, are deficient in vitamin D.
So, what's your opinion, Dr. Reif? Lean more towards a prophylactic with therapeutics or the vaccine?
I think it's real. My view personally is that it should be everybody's personal choice. That's the biggest thing, is that everybody should get to choose this, and also, I mean, maybe even as far as having some anonymity as far as who is getting like in your workplace, especially if you work at a hospital or something to that effect. Like, it'd be really nice, not, if everybody didn't know, oh, that person didn't get the vaccine, we need to, like, there needs to be no stigma about this, and no, like, this is your personal choice. You get to choose. Am I going to take a bunch of vitamins every day and try to make sure and be healthy and eat healthy and, exercise and, that kind of thing, and keep myself low risk that way, or take a vaccine, or, that type of thing. That's the thing, is that should be everybody's choice. As far as, so I do think that I did read early on about the vitamin D, the lack of vitamin D or low vitamin D being associated with severe disease. And so everybody I hope that, I definitely told my patients about that. I hope that was widely, I don't watch news, so I don't know if that was much talked about or advertised. But taking a lot of vitamin D, taking your other vitamins in general, is always good for us. That's recommended anyway, regardless of virus. To me, the hydrochloroquine thing got so hyper politicized that I can't even speak about it. I don't know that you can't. Everybody can't just this. You can't just that. I don't even. It's in my patient population. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not gonna. The kids are not getting that sick with it. We don't treat them with hydrochloroquine anyway. It's too politicized for me to have an opinion, and so yeah.
Well, isn't that the tragedy though? And you're landing right on the thing that I think is the it's the real news story of 2020 is how did we take medicine and politicize it? How did we get to the place where you could take a almost over the counter drug and demonize it to the point where things like zinc or hydroxychloroquine now, if you get a prescription for it for any other treatment, you might actually have to declare that when you're at the pharmacist. You can't just go and say, I'd like some hydroxychloroquine. You can't talk to your doctor. A lot of doctors will stop you from having that. They'll prevent the choice that you were talking about, Bethany. And that's something that we need more and more doctors is patient-centric. Choice of the patient is important. But so you mentioned the H1N1 earlier, Robin. When the swine flu came and we had that whole pandemic, I don't know if you know the numbers on that, but I believe it was 1,000 or 2,000 American deaths occurred before Barack Obama declared a state of national emergency, whereas Trump declared a state of national emergency on the first known American death from coronavirus. Although we can debate whether or not that was actually a COVID death or not. That's an interesting conversation. I don't remember if we've talked about comorbidities, but how has this pandemic been treated differently from swine flu? Could you elaborate a little further on that, Robin? You started on that.
Hysteria. There's people who don't even know that there was a global pandemic declared in 2009. Even if they know 2009 swine flu, they don't know that it was a global pandemic. They don't know that so many don't know that there was this extra vaccine that came about. They don't know about the narcolepsy epidemic that swept across Europe and especially Sweden, Finland. People don't know. The media did not. There was no hammering it during a 24-hour news cycle. No businesses closed and no kids were kept from school, and there were no stickers on the ground telling you where to stand, and nobody was told to wear masks. Nothing. There's nothing that's the same about this at all. And the 2009 pandemic, in my opinion, it existed in order to sell these vaccines not necessarily to individuals, but to countries, because countries had these sleeper contracts that would be activated only if the WHO declared a global pandemic. And the WHO had a definition up on their website for many, many years leading up to 2009, I think like at least 7 years, defining what a pandemic was to the WHO. And it talked about the large number of sick people and deaths that would be required. And then they just changed their definition. And it was just a few weeks later after they changed the definition to exclude death at all. It wasn't even required that anybody die. They changed the definition, and then they went and they declared the pandemic, and they activated all the sleeper contracts. And now all of a sudden, these countries all over the globe are literally obligated to purchase vaccines from GlaxoSmithKline and a couple of other companies. And it was just a huge money transfer from taxpayer dollars that were being held in the coffers of these countries to the vaccine companies. And a lot of people got hurt in Europe. And honestly, I think a lot of people got hurt in the United States also. And our media just They just never covered it. And there's this big mystery, like what happened? How come all of these people got hurt? And they wanted to blame the GlaxoSmithKline had an adjuvant called ASO3, which is squalene made from shark liver. And for a long time, people thought that it was a squalene. It took years and years and years before a study came out and said, okay, it wasn't the squalene that caused this. It caused an epidemic of narcolepsy and cataplexy. So narcolepsy is in a relaxed environment, the person just falls asleep. I mean, they just go completely unconscious. And, it's just like a slow sort of fall, and this person is out. And cataplexy, where if you have strong emotion, like laughter, that you just collapse. And so, I mean, these people have to be terrified that they just go through their day not knowing if someone's going to make them laugh in public and lead to them falling down on the ground. Like you always have to be watching out that you could really get injured when you fall. And this happened to children. It happened to, I think they were mostly preteens that were susceptible. These people's lives are ruined forever. There's no fixing it. There's no drugs to fix this. It's not going to go away, nothing. And a study came out and said, oh, okay, it wasn't the ASO3 squalene adjuvant. It actually was H1N1 itself that was causing this. But the adjuvant is making it worse. And so, there's this adjuvant that's associated with this pandemic vaccine. And it was 2009. The demand for the vaccine completely died when this happened. By the early winter of 2010, nobody wanted this because it was coming out that this is causing cataplexy and narcolepsy. And so the demand went away. And I don't know what happened to all these vaccines. I think that some of them actually went into our national stockpile. And then we just shut up about it. We never talked about H1N1. We never talked about ASO3 and squalene and what it did to these kids. And then a few months ago, I think it was August, the United States decided that it was going to spend, I don't even remember off the top of my head, I should have looked it up, but I want to say it's like $1.2 billion or something on a vaccine that is going to be a Sanofi and Merck joint venture, and Sanofi is going to be making the coronavirus vaccine, and GlaxoSmith, did I say Merck? Sorry, if I did, I meant GlaxoSmithKline. Sanofi and GlaxoSmithKline. Sanofi is making the vaccine, and GlaxoSmithKline is going to be providing their pandemic adjuvant. So here we go again. And so it's not necessarily going to be causing narcolepsy and cataplexy again. It's just going to be amplifying whatever the issue is that it's going to be causing, which we have yet to see. Like, I don't know anything about the Sanofi vaccine. It's not really in the news or anything like that, but whatever side effect, it's going to have this super powerful adjuvant that we don't even use in America for any reason. Like it might be in maybe an elderly flu vaccine or something like that. Now it's definitely in the national stockpile. So anyway.
Do you know what?
Well, you know what? I see Bethany has a question. Let's go ahead and you know what? We'll push back the break. But right after this, we're coming up on a break. Go ahead, Bethany.
Well, my question is, so the beauty of this mRNA vaccine is it doesn't require any adjuvants. So do you know what GlaxoSmithKline or what are they do? Is it the adenovirus thing?
I do. Let me look at it. GSK is a recombinant spike protein antigen, so it is not the same as the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson. Yeah.
Okay. We'll just have to see what happens. At least people will have a choice. I'm hoping as to what vaccine they get, whether or not they get vaccine. I really do think people are going to have a choice whether or not they get vaccinated. And then,
I don't think people are that awake, though. I don't think they're so awake. You're awake. I'm awake. Yeah. John's awake. But most people, unless they work in healthcare, I've heard some healthcare people say, oh, I'm going to hold off on getting that Pfizer vaccine. I'm waiting for the Moderna. And I'm like, it's all the same. What are you waiting for?
Well, let's pick up why those are all the same in just a moment on the other side of this break. Got to take a quick break, and we'll hop right back into this right after the break. Just going to put a marker there. Thank you all for joining us. This has been Opinions Collide. Less of a debate today, more of just an intellectually stimulating conversation. We'll be right back. And we're back. Thank you once again for joining us on When Opinions Collide. I am once again joined by Dr. Bethany Reif and Robin, and we're having more of a discussion today, a bit less of a debate. We're talking about the new vaccine, or vaccines plural. When we left off at the break, Robin was talking about how the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are awfully similar. Why is that, Robin?
So when I say that, the mechanisms are the same, right? They're both mRNA vaccines, and they both have um, polyethylene glycol, the PEG, which we should talk about. So, and then they both are having a lot of the exact same reactions. People are reporting the exact same reactions, and it's not necessarily at the first vaccine, it's at the second one. So I think for Pfizer, it's 3 weeks later, and Moderna, the second dose is going to be 4 weeks later. So we really have a lot to look forward to as far as the media covering these vaccine reactions that are supposed to be 1 in a million, that so far are nowhere near 1 in a million. So, so that's what I mean when I say I don't see the point when I talk to a healthcare worker who says, "Oh, I'm not going to get this dangerous." Or even like this week, I was on a flight to Mexico and I was talking to my flight attendant, my Frontier flight attendant, about it. And even she was saying, "Well, I heard that Pfizer one is really bad, and I have friends who are going to hold out and get the Moderna one." And I'm like, it's all the same thing. It's going to be the same reaction." And so, something that I want to talk about, if you don't mind segueing into it, is talking about the PEG. Do you want to talk about that, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and dig in.
So, something that came out in the summer, it came out through Children's Health Defense, because they had somebody, like, sort of within the organization, someone that they were working with who is former military, who had a horrible reaction to a certain vaccine. And because of the ordeal that this former soldier went through, he knew what was going to happen here, because he knew that PEG was in these two vaccines. And so he came to CHD and he told them about his experience, and he told them that he knew from his research about what happened to him, 70% of Americans have antibodies to PEG. So this polyethylene glycol is an emulsifier. It's in our shampoos, it's in our soaps, it's in so many things. And so I am not certain on why we have antibodies to it, because we certainly don't make antibodies to everything that we eat, or everything that we ingest in some way. So I don't know if it has been injected in the past or not. 70% of people are sensitized to it. Now, that doesn't mean that you're allergic to it. It means that there's the potential for an allergy. It doesn't mean you're going to have a reaction to it. And so this man said, this is a train wreck waiting to happen. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote a letter to the FDA. He wrote a letter to HHS. I mean, he CC'd Fauci, like this was a real letter. And he warned them in September that this was going to happen, that people were going to begin having anaphylactic reactions. I mean, he seriously sounded the alarm before anybody else. Nobody cared about PEG. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And I want to say HHS's response to him was, take it up with the manufacturer. I mean, like, just completely null and void our watchdog agency, right? Our regulatory agency that is supposed to be caring about us here. That's just baffling to me that the FDA and the HHS would say take it up with the manufacturer, which CHD did. They tried to take it up with the manufacturer. I don't know what the outcome was. I'm sure it was nothing. So now you will see headlines when you look at these anaphylaxis stories. And so, there were the several nurses that it happened to in the UK. Now we've had several people that it happened to in Alaska, several more in Idaho, several more in Illinois. And it's very weird to me that these things are happening in clusters, because I don't believe for a second that they're happening in clusters. I think that some states are reporting it to the media, but most states are not. My assumption is that this is happening all over the country. So right now we're at 10 episodes of anaphylaxis in the United States for 700,000 doses, right? So that is one reaction for every 70,000 doses for a reaction that's supposed to be a 1 in a million reaction. That's what we're told. Anaphylaxis is a 1 in a million reaction. So now the media is actually reporting, and the regulatory agencies are actually being honest about it, that they think it's the PEG that this is happening. So I don't know how much is in store for Americans. I don't know how much is happening behind the scenes that's not being reported. But, if people think that they can go get this vaccine at a pharmacy is not going to give you epinephrine. They're not going to give you anything you don't have a prescription for. To my knowledge, there's no law that tells pharmacies that they can just keep some extra epinephrine on hand for people who go into shock while getting their vaccines. I mean, there's laws that say schools can keep extra epinephrine, but I don't think you can like walk up to a pharmacy and just say, well, I'm going to die, I need you to inject me with epinephrine. So if people are going to be getting this vaccine in a scenario that doesn't have a crash cart ready to save their life, people are going to die. And if people think that they could go through a drive-through vaccination station the way they go through these drive-through COVID testing sites and get this, they're going to die in their cars. It's going to be tragic. So hopefully, however the vaccine is going to be administered, and distributed throughout the United States with our military, that now they're seriously considering the fact that people are going to have a few minutes to live. There's a lot of people who are going to have a couple of minutes to live with the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine if they don't get epinephrine immediately. And it's not required that they already have serious food allergies and serious, latex or bee sting allergies that cause them to carry EpiPens. This is happening to people who have no history of severe allergies.
So before we move on for that, here's a quick question. Is it even possible for manufacturing to stop and to reevaluate that, or we're just way past that? We're way past that mark.
It's not
Just
going to.
way past
No,
that mark.
they're just going to deny it. I mean, even in the UK, you had their national health system say, okay, we're going to tap the brakes on administering this vaccine to anybody who has a history of allergy. CDC turned around the next week. I have a friend who was on a phone call listening to the CDC, and he wasn't able to record it, and it's not published anywhere, where they're sitting there saying that they completely disagree with that advice. Anybody with a history of severe allergies in the United States is going to still be told to get the vaccine. The CDC just disagrees with this. So they don't care. FDA doesn't care. The advisory group doesn't care. The CDC's advisory group, they don't care.
So I would think a lot of that has to do with the politicization of medicine. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Rife? How this whole season has just changed everything, the way we deal with medicine, and now it's part of politics.
Well, I do want to say that anaphylaxis to a vaccine is not something that's typically related to people with severe allergies. To be honest, they're random. We don't know. And so you could have a history, you could have significant allergies and be perfectly fine with a vaccine, of course. And so I'm sure a lot of people are. And also, I don't consider anaphylaxis a 1 in a million. I don't think anybody actually said that. We say severe vaccine reactions, in general are 1 in a million, but I think anaphylaxis is definitely listed. It's listed above that. And actually in the Pfizer right now, in the Pfizer recommendations for giving this vaccine, their requirements in order to dispense this vaccine, their current requirements is that it has to be done in a facility with a crash cart with epinephrine available, and that's stated on their paperwork. And then it's on their website and their requirements. It's also required that the people are supposed to stay for 15 minutes after getting the vaccine. So right now, the way Pfizer is releasing it and giving their requirements, these drive-through stations that I know people are setting up are getting ready to do aren't feasible.
I mean, that same insert says
really
not
bad
tested.
Idea.
It says not tested on pregnant women, and our CDC said in this call last week they absolutely believe that this should be given to pregnant women. I mean, if you're that dumb as a pregnant woman to say, I mean, I watched what was she, an anesthesiologist or radiologist who put her post up on Facebook, and she was 34 weeks pregnant getting that vaccine because she believes that the antibodies will be passed on to her baby. Your baby is in no danger anyway at all.
Yeah.
So
yeah, to me the chances, the rates of illness for babies and children is not worth getting the vaccine, at least in pregnancy, and until we know a lot more about this vaccine. And I mean, I know at some facilities, because I know someone who got their vaccine and they were specifically asked if they were planning on getting pregnant this year. And if they're planning on getting pregnant this year, then to not get the vaccine. And that was what their standard, that's what they were telling every woman as they were dispensing it. So
certainly in the trials. In the trials, you're told don't get pregnant. You're also told as a man not to inseminate anyone. And yet, here we are.
So, so,
it's not
so,
like that. So what will happen is over time we'll get more data on this because people even if people are planning to not get pregnant, they're going to get pregnant. It just happens, and that type of thing. And so over time we will get data on this. But this is 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the future, at least to know that it's healthy for the baby. And so it's one of those things. Right now we can't answer that question. Right now, I don't think it should be given to pregnant women. And I mean, I suppose every pregnant woman could get that choice. I suppose that's still her choice. Hey, we have no idea if this is going to affect your baby or not, or we have no idea of the long-term consequences of this, or if there are any. Hopefully there's not. I can't, knowing what I know of physiology, I don't know of a way it would hurt the baby. You said there's something about some sort of cross reaction with some antibodies. I mean, until we know more about that, then
Yeah.
people
So
should just
what
be told, hey, it's not good, recommended.
what the concern is, so Wolfgang Vodarg is a German physician, and he and this other guy who was from Pfizer, his name Yeadon, so Yadon maybe. So they wrote a letter, it was a couple of weeks ago, expressing their huge concerns to the European equivalent of our FDA. And so they were expressing their concerns, number one, about the PEG, but number two was that the vaccine may end up making antibodies to placentas. So if it makes antibodies to placenta and you're pregnant, if it does, I'm not saying it does, you could lose your baby or
Right.
you could become sterile. So
Yeah.
this little blurb here that I was looking at said that in the petition, the two acknowledge that there's no indication whether antibodies against spike proteins of SARS viruses would also act like, okay, this is what it was looking for, was the Syntin-1 antibody, SYNCYTIN, so anti-Syntin-1 antibodies. And so, because that is a mechanism, I guess, this anti-Syntin, it's a known mechanism for the vaccine. And so I guess we'll just wait and see. But I mean, just like with
So
Gardasil, you're not going to know for several years if women.
yeah, well, if it makes sense though, if that's the case, that if the COVID spike protein antibody is similar to this other antibody and there's a cross reaction there, then anyone who has COVID has this risk because they would have the same antibody. It's made the same way by the body.
It depends on what that mechanism is. I don't know that it's naturally occurring. I don't know that it's the spike. I don't know what it is.
Well, the spike is the only one that the vaccine is making. Is the antibody to the spike protein.
But I'm not at the level where I could debate that right now. So I don't want to agree or
know.
disagree with you. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how. But if there was, I mean, because the antibodies do cross react, we know that.
The molecular mimicry. Yep.
Yeah. So we would have to. So I don't know. It's something to keep an eye on and see what would happen. And I definitely think that it should be seriously considered. I mean, I think doing anything that we don't know anything about or we don't know much about, especially something that we've only had studies on for the past several months, doing that while you're pregnant when we have no clue, like that, to me that sounds like a really bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't do that. So but everybody gets to make their choice, and I suppose some people may be okay with that.
well, I hope everyone gets to make their choice, but God willing, things will all pan out with this new administration. Should they ultimately take their seat, hopefully they're prevented from making it mandatory. But so we were talking about some of the other side effects from getting a vaccine, something that happens on a occasional basis when an individual gets a vaccine. We saw that one lady who was on national television. She was, believe, a nurse in Tennessee, if I remember correctly. She got a dose of the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, and about 17 minutes later, whatever it was, she goes on national television and she passes out. So, real quick, Bethany, what's a common explanation for this? What normally happens, and is it normal for it to be 15-17 minutes out after getting the dose?
Just to speak on side effects real quick too, there is a difference. Keep in mind, there's a difference between side effects and expected responses. So vaccine response is typically, we get some soreness on our arm, maybe a knot on our arm, kind of thing that's expected, and then our body mounts an immune response. That's what the vaccine is doing, is mounting an immune response. And so it seems more significant with the second dose, is what people are reporting. But maybe some fever, chills, they kind of feel fatigued, and those kind of headache, those kind of things are being reported. But that's expected. That's a vaccine response, and that's not considered a vaccine reaction. That is your body mounting an immune response to create antibodies, and that's part of your body. Your body is going, oh no, we're sick. Oh no, we're sick. We need to do all these things to make sure that we fight off this virus. And then within 24 or 48 hours, it goes, oh, it's over. Everything is fine. The virus has calmed down. Everything's fine. And then your immune response will come down. So that's that, and that's as far as like immune response versus reaction kind of thing. As far as fainting, in my experience, the typical it's typically someone who maybe is a little dehydrated or didn't eat in the past several hours. They get a shot, and then they stand up and they faint, and it's scary at the time, and hopefully they don't hurt themselves on the way down. A lot of times with my teenagers in the office, I often suggest that they sit there for a few minutes. I try to remember to ask, did you eat today? That kind of thing. But in my experience, it's only happened to me a few times in my office. But in my experience, that's the situation. I don't know anything about this particular case with this nurse. I didn't see the story, and of course, I wasn't there, so I don't know the situation with that. But yeah, having a little bit of a delay, it's like a vasovagal stress response. I don't know why it happens to some people, but some people are just sensitive that way. It would probably happen with any other type of, if they got an IV or any other kind of stick. It's not necessarily related to the ingredients in the vaccine or that type of thing. It's just a stress reaction. Is my understanding of the whole thing.
I have to assume that a nurse who will volunteer to get a COVID vaccine on live national television is getting an annual flu vaccine. And if she's getting the annual flu vaccine and she claims that she passes out anytime she feels pain, then she's passing out every year when she gets her annual flu vaccine. She wouldn't be a very good candidate to do anything on live TV. I mean, I don't buy her story. I just don't. I think these nurses, every single
like
healthcare worker that has had a horrible reaction has gone allegedly to the media, like through their bosses or through their hospital or whoever, to say, I'm okay, and I might not be able to get this vaccine, but I want all of you. Let's soldier forward. Everyone should do this. Like, they're all saying the same thing. It's just so bizarre. I don't believe any of it. I have a kid who has been in anaphylaxis 5 times, and he has been in anaphylactic shock once. And you're literally staring at death. You're watching somebody die. They could have a stroke at any moment. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, you think, oh, I'll just give them Benadryl. That's not going to stop anaphylaxis. And you don't know what minute is going to be their last minute. You don't know. I've drug it out for 15, 20 minutes before administering epinephrine out of my own fear of hurting my child with the needle. The first time that I did it, I probably nearly killed my kid. I mean, he looked horrible the next day. He looked, just eyes swollen out, and then they sink in, and then they're dark, and his throat had gotten so tight, and his voice gets real squeaky. I mean, you're watching somebody die, and you're watching their body like try to dump whatever it is that they're seeing as this threat, and it doesn't know how, and it's this huge cytokine storm and all of that. Do you think my kid is going to get up and say, everyone continue eating peanuts, ignore me? Who would say that? You almost died. I don't believe for a second that a healthcare worker would tell all of America, go do this dumb thing that I just did that nearly killed me. I'm sure you're going to be fine. I don't buy it.
It's hard to conjecture. However, color me cynical after 2020. I mean, I may have been cynical before, but a lot more so now. It is interesting. So some of the history on this vaccine I find fascinating, and at some point I think we need to dig into this deeper on how the vaccine came to be. But for right now, if someone is not going to be taking the vaccine, Dr. Reif, if someone decides that they don't want to take the vaccine, what are good prophylactics and good best practices to prevent getting the COVID?
Yeah, well, I mean, to prevent getting it, definitely hand washing, just staying home when you're sick, or staying away from people who are sick, that type of thing, um, and washing your hands a lot. The other thing is vitamin D is good, vitamin C, those kind of things. Just being on a daily normal dose of those things. Regular exercise, eating good food, as in like healthy portions of things and healthy foods, fruits and vegetables, and getting your proteins and those types of things. I think one of the biggest things I think we can actually do. The other thing that raises a risk factor that's controllable. I mean, some of the risk factors, heart disease and some of these other diseases, if you've got lung problems or those kind of things, you can't control that. And age, we obviously can't control that. But one of the things you can control is if you're overweight, lose weight. That is a huge risk factor. And get whatever help you need to do that, to get yourself in a more healthy, your body in a more healthy state, so that if and when you do contract this virus, your body can handle it, no problem, and you can move on.
So, Robin, prophylactics, what are things that people can do to avoid getting the virus, or at least minimize the impact once they have it?
So I think the number one thing that you can do is eat at home. Wash your hands and eat at home. I think that this is a fecal oral pathogen, and I think that all of public health knows that this is a fecal oral pathogen. And I don't think it's floating around in the air, with the exception of air that is around the toilets that get flushed, and it's aerosolized. So I think that there is probably a chance of inhaling or eating these fecal particles when you're in the bathroom. And it's probably honestly on the outside of these filthy masks that everybody is wearing around, and they're touching the mask and touching their hands and touching their face and all of that. So washing your hands with soap is the number one thing that you can do. And then I agree with the vitamin C, D3, zinc, NAC to get that glutathione going, all of that. I don't know why there has not been a conversation in this country about BMI. You've got 300, 400-pound Americans saying that they're keeping people safe by wearing masks or telling everyone else to wear masks to be safe and healthy. And I have these conversations if I walk into a store not wearing a mask and they've posted up a morbidly obese person as the enforcer at the front, and I'll stop and I'll talk to them and I'll say, well, what are you going to do when it's the vaccine and you're not allowed to let anyone in unless they've had the vaccine? And I'm told, well, I'll just do whatever it takes to keep people safe and healthy. That I've got friends who are immunocompromised, and I'm just assuming that those are also morbidly obese people. And there's no conversation about this at all. And I'm not saying going around shaming people for the condition that they've got in, but like, this is just the honest truth. And nobody's talking about it, about this severe obesity that is taking people out. And we're just told that that you can be healthy at any size, and you can't be healthy at any size. I mean, you're just in a chronic state of inflammation.
By definition.
And the truth is that vaccines aren't going to work on morbidly obese people anyway. That is such a dirty secret about vaccines. They do not work because you are already chronically inflamed. The vaccine is not going to do anything for you. So it's just a tragedy. It's a real missed opportunity. America's obesity rate is so high.
Well, I wish we had less body positivity and more self-acceptance, right? Not it's not about being prideful about your body. It's about accepting your own innate value. I agree that that's absolutely correct. We're running up really, really tight on the end, but I want to ask Dr. Reif, should kids wear masks? I see a bunch of 4-year-olds wearing masks when I pass the schoolyards. Is that actually medically sound or intelligent advice?
So I have to be really cautious here because I don't know what the American Academy of Pediatric recommendation on child masks is. I actually have no idea. Um, I'm not a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I disagree with a lot of their ethical stuff. So the American College of Pediatrics is the more, I agree more with their ethical standpoints on things. And I think my understanding of their current stance um, is that there isn't enough data to show that kids wearing masks at school is probably anything. So that
I mean, as a mom,
I don't want to.
do you think that your kiddos could actually successfully wear a mask all day?
Well, and so that's where you get, they're expecting, 2, 3, 4 year olds to wear masks. Like I've heard stories of the kids coming home with someone else's mask, and it's really bad. These kids are not they're not mentally capable or mature enough to understand this. They touch it constantly, and I mean, it just, to me, it makes more sense by these kids are probably rubbing their mouths and touching their mask and adjusting it and all that kind of stuff. And the teachers are spending so much time putting the masks back on the patient, the student, I imagine. I don't really know how it's working in these schools. I haven't been in any of these classrooms or anything like that, but it sounds ridiculous to expect really young ones to wear masks. I mean, the older ones that can handle it, I don't know if it's absolutely necessary. I think hand washing is probably more important. I do though, as of from what my understanding, I fully agree that this is a respiratory virus and that it is spread like a normal, upper respiratory thing and not fecal oral. But so I will respectfully disagree on that point. But but I don't know that. But the kids, I don't, that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
One way
They need to
or
be hand washing. This virus isn't super dangerous to kids anyway, is my big kind of, thought on the whole thing. Now they could be taking it home to grandma and that kind of thing, so that's concerning. But so when the kid gets home, you wash their hands real good, change their shirt, that type of thing, I think is probably pretty helpful. Um, and we just all have to do our best. But I don't know that expecting a 3-year-old to wear a mask is gonna help anything.
there is something to wearing the mask and wearing the gloves, because healthcare professionals do actually there's like 3% or less who are in COVID units. A lot of these, in certain COVID units, a lot of these medical professionals, but the counter argument is they're not doing this thing. They're not touching their face and putting their, so they're actually exhibiting hygiene. So is it the mask and the gloves, or is it the careful, judicious hygiene?
I think it's the combination. So the other thing too is that the masks that the medical professionals are wearing are multi-layer medical masks. And
Sure.
so in order to get through the mask, that viral particle has to kind of do this little dance to get through that mask. And so it doesn't. There are very, very little of it makes it through the mask. You still got the sides are open and that kind of thing. But I can see Robin shaking your head at me. But
Well, there's not a
so
super spreader event in America or even in China that I've read about. There's not a super spreader event that isn't linked with food and drink. It's at a bar, it's at a restaurant, and then there was the one choir practice in Washington State where they wanted to say that it was the singing, but in fact there were oranges and cookies served to many of those people. And then, like, who knows what drama was happening in the bathroom toilets with people who have diarrhea and they're flushing. A lot of these toilets don't even have lids, but people typically don't even put the lid down. But there's no super spreader event ever. I challenge you to find one. We can continue this conversation that is not linked to food and drink. And they
And
know that taking those PPI, the proton pump inhibitor, stomach acid blockers, you are 2 to 4 times more likely to come down with coronavirus because you're killing your first line of defense in the stomach. Those ACE2 receptors are far more plentiful in the small intestine than they are in the lungs. And And then the CDC came out a couple months ago and said that you're twice as likely to catch coronavirus if you eat in restaurants. That's like the one thing they can find that increases somebody's chance of getting it, as far as like locale. And it's restaurant. And they come out and they say, instead of saying, oh, I think it's being spread like polio or hepatitis A, that it's under the waiter's fingernails. You know, you've got sick people, mildly sick people coming into work, and they don't wash their hands, because that's a simple fact. A third of people don't wash their hands, as including healthcare professionals. Sometimes it's just disgusting. And so the CDC comes out and says it's because you take your mask off at restaurants to eat, rather than even entertaining publicly the policy. But you know, though, when that airline in China came out just 2 weeks ago, told their flight attendants to wear diapers and to stay out of the bathrooms, they know it's in the toilet. They all know. It's just
So what we're gonna have to